The things that I love the most about sales is every day is different. Every interaction is different. The idea that I would come to work and basically do the same thing every day sounds like torture, frankly.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Welcome to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. I'm Ed Marsh, your host, and I'm happy to have you watching and listening today. Thanks for joining. Industrial manufacturers have, many common sales challenges, and today we're going to focus on a couple of them around the sales manager role and the balance between technical depth and sales excellence. And we're going to get a great first-person perspective, not just some kind of theoretical advisory view. Sometimes I have guests that really know the science behind something. Sometimes I have guests that do stuff. And so this is rubber meeting the road kind of time today. I'm pleased to be joined by Mike Miller, who is the Director of Sales and Marketing at Azo Incorporated. Azo provides, here's a little bit of marketing speak, custom-tailored ingredient handling solutions for commercial and industrial manufacturers. Now, Mike is solidly a technical guy. He's got a degree in aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics from the University of Cincinnati. He's also a business guy. He's got an MBA from the University of Memphis. He's an Air Force veteran, a dad, a husband. He's a recently promoted sales manager. He's an active member of his Memphis community. We're going to talk more about all of those things as we chat today. So as we jump in, please remember to like, share, comment. I read and answer comments. Please subscribe. And with that, welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, let's start in an unexpected place, several hundred feet under the ground in Wyoming in a missile silo.
Yeah.
You had an interesting Air Force job. Tell us about that.
I did, yeah. So my job in the Air Force had nothing to do with airplanes or air superiority. I guess maybe a little bit of air superiority if you think about it. So I was a nuclear missile officer, what we affectionately called ourselves Missaleers. So I was an officer in the Air Force. I was responsible for command and control of intercontinental ballistic missiles, specifically the Minuteman III weapon system. There are, to my count, 450 of them based here in the U.S. 150 of those are in around the Wyoming, Nebraska, northern Colorado area. So, the day-to-day, I was responsible for, like I said, command and control, maintenance and security operations, and coordinating teams that do all of those things to make sure that we have alert-ready intercontinental ballistic missiles ready to go.
So when did you decide you were going to go to the Air Force? And did you select that specialty, or is that just where you ended up by chance?
Maybe a little bit of both. So I decided to go into the Air Force. I didn't know it at the time, but when I was 5 years old, my uncle took me to Cape Canaveral at John F. Kennedy Space Center.
Cool.
And I fell in love with space. The idea of becoming an astronaut and going to space, I was just completely captivated by it. And I didn't know how to do that. I just thought that it was cool and sexy and that it would be a really fun thing to do. And so as I got older, into high school, I started doing more research on this. And what I came to understand was the vast majority of astronauts were engineers who were pilots, going to the Navy or going to the Air Force. And so that directed me towards the Air Force. I was slotted to go to the academy. At the last second, that didn't happen, so I had to transition. And so that was when I learned about ROTC, that there were still options and avenues to get into the Air Force. So I graduated with an engineering degree, and right before I entered into active duty, I had a pilot slot. I was ready to go, and I met a girl, and she was not interested in being a 20-plus year military wife. And I was pretty sure that she was the thing. And I wasn't so sure about 20 plus years in the military. So I made a last minute change. I went to my commanding officer in ROTC and I said, hey, I don't think I can do this pilot thing. And that was his dream. And so that was an interesting conversation. I said, I still want to do ops. I still think that this is, my calling. What options are there for me? And he said, well, we've got this thing called space and missile operations, and I think you'd be really well suited to it. So I said, okay. I transitioned, and when I got into training, I really wanted to go to the space side. Long story short, I ended up choosing a place where I could be that guaranteed that I would be near to Lauren, my now wife at the time, my girlfriend. And so through a series of small decisions, incremental steps towards trying to control my own destiny, I ended up in missile operations in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
And engineering mechanics, is that mechanical engineering or is that something different? I've never heard of that degree before.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't know why they call it that. I mean, it's engineering mechanics is really just the study of how things operate, how things move.
Okay.
So I had a lot of schooling around mechanics, statics, dynamics, fluid mechanics, vibrations, and so forth. So,
got it. So 5 years in the Air Force, and then another small decision somewhere along the way that kind of changed your path, and you got out and you went into sales, selling conveyor systems to the auto industry. What prompted you to get out? What prompted selecting sales, particularly sales, and how the auto industry? How did you end up in that company and that role?
Yeah, so over the 5 years that I spent in the Air Force, I had fulfilled this sense of obligation that I had. Talking about the astronaut idea, I had basically put a kibosh on that when I decided to not become a pilot.
Right.
The likelihood of me becoming that thing, I'm a smart guy, but those guys are brilliant, kind of smart. So the realization at some point that the likelihood of getting there wasn't high, and that I had some other priorities. I had matured a little bit. So along that path, towards the end of my time in the military, I realized that I didn't have that same fire for being in the service. I'd felt that I had served my commitment to myself as well as to my country, and I was interested to see what else was in store. I knew that I could be successful somewhere else, just as I had been in the military, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so for the first 6 months of my time after I got out of the Air Force, I was really struggling to figure out what I was going to do and be.
When I got out of the Army, they sent me to a transition center where they gave me this personality profile to take. And it told me I needed to either be a shepherd or a florist. So I'm not sure about the quality of advice, at least back in my day, that we got from those things.
Yeah, we also went through a transition class. I wasn't the only person to get out at this time. I have a small group of really close friends that I developed in the Air Force, and we all kind of got out at the same time, and we were all trying to figure out what that thing was going to be. A lot of my colleagues ended up going into some form of project management or project engineering, and I thought that I'd have a good place there. In hindsight, that was definitely not for me. I needed something with a bit more variety, a bit more spontaneity. But yeah, so that transition was challenging because, as you might imagine, there's not a lot of direct translation of skills for maintaining nuclear weapons for things outside of the military. But yeah, through a series of events, we ended up moving back here to Memphis, where I live now. That's where my wife grew up, and she got involved in her dad's business. Along the way, I was connected with a network of business professionals here, and one guy in particular who's a recruiter and also an HR guy said, you might like sales. You've got a great personality. You like talking to people. You have a technical understanding. Have you thought about becoming a sales engineer? And I was like, what's that? Tell me more about that. So he got me connected with a company here in town that sells conveyor equipment to the automotive industry. And so that's where I really cut my teeth in sales. I did that for a little over a year, and it was a great organization, but just some cultural differences. And along the way, I ended up getting contacted by a very persistent recruiter who introduced me to AZO. So that was nearly.
All right, so we're going to jump to AZO in a minute, but backing up, the story you tell, you basically stumbled into sales because you didn't know what else you were going to do. And so many people do that, and some people thrive, and most people end up quite average and mediocre. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what you've learned having been in sales, and particularly as a sales manager and hiring sales reps, and the risk of that approach of, oh, well, he's a people person who likes talking to people, so he's smart and knows the technical details, so he's going to be good in sales. As you entered that first sales role, you must have had preconceived or preconceptions about what sales was like. How did your assumptions and preconceptions compare to reality?
Yeah, I'm pretty critical of like that stereotypical used car salesman kind of look and feel, right? And I knew that that's not what I wanted to be. And I knew that if I was going to go into sales with an organization, that the thing that I have to be selling is complex. And so I was drawn to this company that sold conveyor systems. They're multi-million-dollar systems, and the pace is incredibly high. And I just thought that was really appealing. I really didn't know what I was doing at the time. My first manager, I kid you not, his advice to me my first day was, Mike, I'm glad you're here. I want you to be successful. Go and get it done. And that is as much.
Not exactly appropriate onboarding or training.
Yeah, that's in hindsight. I realized that was a little light. At the time, I was like, okay, cool. I'm all piss and vinegar, and I'm ready to go. And whatever happens, I'm just going to take it in stride. Right. And it might be dirty, it might be not pretty, but we'll figure it out. So
a good lesson on how not to onboard. What other lessons did you learn about sales in that first job that you carried to Azo, where I think you've been now almost a decade, right?
Correct. Yeah, it'll be a month or 10 years next month. So,
congratulations. That's so unusual these days. That's an accomplishment. Yeah,
that was also one of the things that I was looking for. Was I wanted stability. I wanted to go to an organization that I could grow in and become an integral part of an organization. So I thought that was this other company that I worked with. I only lasted about a year. The perception of time at certain ages, time kind of flies as you get older. So back then I thought that it was I'd been there a while, but anyway, I had certain, I would call them intuitions about what is required to do this job. So being a good listener, listening to the customer, trying desperately not to walk on conversations. I didn't execute those things well all the time, but I knew enough. And the customers that I was working with at the time, they had been longstanding customers of our company, and a couple of the key customers, in particular, individuals, were willing to take some time to help develop me.
Nice.
So I was really lucky in that regard. And I don't know that I necessarily noticed it at the time, but looking back, those experiences were incredibly formative. And then there were a couple key individuals in the organization who helped me kind of manage those relationships, folks that were oriented towards the field. One guy in particular was a field service supervisor who essentially lived at this one customer site, and he provided a lot of stability. And I was able to fill in the gaps of things that he either didn't want to do or didn't know how to do. And so we had a really good kind of symbiotic relationship. But
you're describing what I would call relationship management. You're not talking about any technical, tactical sales skills or strategic sales skills. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes and no. So there were the customer itself was pretty dynamic. So there were some folks in the organization who I was helping them with their operational projects. Now, some of those projects were on the order of $1 or $2 million, so very large operational extensions of existing things, or buying strategic parts replacements for systems. But then there were also competitive selling systems where it was me against 6 other competitors. We had to go in, do a formal presentation and whatnot. And, there was a discovery period leading up to that where we have to ask certain questions, make sure that we understand the scope, and really being challenged on how are we going to differentiate ourselves versus these other guys?
Right.
So it was a healthy blend of all of those things. And I was responsible for, a $100 sale all the way up to a $10 million sale. So it was whatever we did with that company or that plant, really, that was my responsibility.
So in my experience, many industrial manufacturers, particularly companies with German affiliation like AZO, tend to believe that sales is about technical knowledge. And I believe very strongly, I think it's proven by the data and by experience and anecdotally, but I believe that nobody buys because of millimeters or PSI or durometer of the rubber or grade of the stainless or any of the countless other technical factors that we can all rattle off about the machines that we sell. Buyers need to make sure that what they're buying meets the requirement, and there's complexities for sure. So the technical details are about avoiding a mistake, but they buy for business reasons. So as a trained engineer, how do you weigh in? I mean, on the one hand, everything in your being and your background screams to focus on those technical details. How do you fight the urge, or at what point did you realize it was important to fight the urge to pitch technical details and instead focus on the business?
Yeah, it's probably been a couple years now. I think maybe three years or so. We had gone through some training, gone through some reorientation on how to think about the customer relationship and that dynamic. And it took, I think it really took me taking a half step back from doing the selling to really come to understand and realize that that's what was required.
And I think I remember you sharing with me, you were probably a year into the training when suddenly one day the clouds parted and it all made sense for you. There was a very stark realization, if I remember you describing it correctly.
That's correct. Yeah. I love to get into the technical details, and the folks that we traditionally talk to, that's all they're concerned with. But fundamentally, they're not the ones making the decisions.
Right.
And so, as from an organizational standpoint, we've kind of always struggled with getting to the decision maker. And in some cases, it's just not realistic. We deal with Fortune 10 companies as well as mom and pop companies. Right. And when I think about where we've been successful, we've had success with both of those types of organizations, but our strategic approach to those is fundamentally different. But I guess that's not true. Our approach, the end result is different. Who we talk to and what we can affect. Right. There are limits when we start to talk to large companies, but our approach shouldn't differ from one company to the next. We should
if you can't affect it, can you put it in your forecast?
So the effect is not a 1 or a 0. There's an amount, a degree to what
it's a continuum. It's not binary.
Yeah. And so we are getting smarter on how to more accurately forecast those types of things. And it's different from one project to the next. It's different from one customer to the next.
Right. Probably from one sales rep to the next as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Also that's the part that I'm trying to work on. The external factors, there's only so much control you have over those things, but how you respond to the unique attributes of each customer. And you have to really know in your bones how this customer is going to interact and operate, and what that gives you a better understanding of what you can affect in terms of those outcomes.
And do you have any sort of a tool that you've trained yourself to use when somebody asks you a technical question and you feel yourself slipping into that technical conversation, or you watch one of your sales reps have that inclination? How do you run up a red flag, or how do you catch yourself, or how do you train people to resist that urge?
Yeah. So I think it depends on where you are in the sales cycle. So on the front end, when you're talking about customer challenges, and have you gone to the level of depth of understanding, the question is, why does this matter to them? Like if we answer this question, or we get a response to this thing, like why does that matter? And if that answer doesn't ask the question again, then we know we've gone far enough. And so you just have to keep getting down to, well, you're concerned about this thing, but why is that the case? Oh, well, such and such. Okay, well, is that a concern? Yeah. Well, why is that a concern? Right? You keep going down that road. And the same is true. This is a recent realization that I've had. the same is true for when we present a solution. When we are trying to solve a task, what's the ultimate outcome of us being able, if we bring a solution to bear, what does it mean for the customer? Well, it accomplishes X. Okay, that's great, but what does that mean in terms of the bottom line business, right? Like, why does this matter to the guys that are writing the checks? Because they're going to ask these same questions. And if we
they're never going to write a check if they don't have a solid answer to it.
Correct.
They're not going to do it because the plant engineer somewhere thinks it would be cool to do.
Yep. Yeah. Fundamentally, it has to have a definable outcome with some quantitative piece component to it. And it needs to provide assurance there needs to be assurance that it's actually going to do that.
That outcome needs to be material to the business, I would argue as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, but businesses do conduct projects or initiatives that don't have a direct impact on the bottom line. Mm-hmm. Things like operator safety, material safety, things like these. It's
compliance.
Compliance, right? It's there is some pain, but it can be a little bit squishy. But at least we have identified, listen, here's the hard numbers, here's the hard facts. And also, by the way, for your consideration, you're also addressing this issue and this issue and this issue, which heretofore maybe hasn't been a concern, but have you been lucky so far, or have you been proactive about these things?
Right.
And it gets that customer thinking about the impacts of what we're doing, and that there's second, third, and fourth order effects to whatever it is that we're bringing to bear.
So as you're talking about raising these other topics, often industrial salespeople will hesitate, saying, that's not our specialty. That's not what they asked us for. That's not what we do well. I don't know about that part of business. Do you ever have a little voice in your head, or have your reps push back, or hear something that says, wait a minute, that's not up to us to talk about? And if so, how do you respond to that?
Yeah. The thing I go back to most often, especially when we talk about trying to get to the root challenge that we're trying to solve, and if we bring a solution to bear, what that outcome is going to be, I remind them that this work is going to be done somewhere along the way, from when we found out about the opportunity to close, that they're going to agree to execute a project with us. Someone in the organization is going to ask these questions and is going to need these answers.
Right.
And it would be great and would likely lead to a positive outcome for us being involved if we had a part in that conversation.
And why do you think leads to a positive outcome?
A positive outcome meaning with the customer?
Yeah, I mean, my hypothesis is that by doing that, you're differentiating yourself and your company, as opposed to, well, we're 2 millimeters smaller or bigger, or a meter per minute faster, which sounds like everybody else. Instead, if you help them understand their business better, then you become the people that they want to talk to.
Correct. Yeah. Being that trusted advisor, establishing credibility is going to, that's the currency that we use to provide the assurance at the end when they make a decision that there's a firm foundation around, we agree that we're going to do this. And it's built upon the idea that I trust that this organization, that this guy I'm talking to knows what he's talking about, because he's not in it just to sell some equipment. He's in it to solve my problems. He cares enough to ask me hard-hitting questions, maybe things I haven't fully considered, or even if I have considered, at least he is acknowledging that those things are at play. That there's a different type of credibility that is led there beyond, here's how cool this one machine is, and here's all the bells and whistles, and wouldn't it be great if you guys had this?
So, quick bit of context for people listening. What does bulk ingredient handling mean?
That's a big question. It means a lot of things. Practically, any manufacturing organization of a certain size is going to handle materials to make some product, and they will be in some form of bulk, major, minor, or micro quantities. And traditionally, it's we use the term bulk solid pretty generically. Practically speaking, it's a granule, a pellet, powder, or a really finely made piece of material.
So it could be plastic resin pellets, it could be flour, it could be sugar, it could be titanium dioxide, it could be any of a variety of things like that.
Generally not all of those things together in one product, but yeah. But yeah, so we look at the markets in a couple of major categories, basically food and beverage, chemicals, and plastics.
Got it.
There's a couple more nuances in there, but for argument's sake, that's essentially how we are organized. And so bulk ingredient handling is the how do we construct a manufacturing production to make some product that has efficiency, that is efficient from a time standpoint, efficient from a physical layout standpoint, and also is efficient from an operational standpoint.
Right.
We are helping our customers reduce their cost of goods so that they can make a more attractive and profitable product for themselves.
So picture a railhead next to a factory, a rail car pulling up, a vacuum to suck stuff out, conveyors to move it through the factory, devices to get rodent feces out of it and blend the right quantities, including very sophisticated or minor quantities in case of pharmaceuticals, move that into the place where it might be getting packaged or dried or whatever the case may be. So moving the ingredients through the plant.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. You talked about your 15-second onboarding in your first sales job. You talked about how you really only first got sales training a couple of years ago. With the perspective that you have now, how would you describe the importance of proper sales onboarding, proper sales training, and where does product training plug into that?
Yeah. So very recently, we have really formalized and organized how we're going to train the salespeople, sales engineers of the future in our organization. I've spent a tremendous amount of time on this in the very recent past. At a very high level, my approach is really in these orders. So understanding aptitude. So this is kind of a precursor. Do you have the basic building blocks to be a good sales engineer? Mindset, and you have to bring a certain amount of that to the table. But then crystallizing that in the context of what we do at Azo and what that looks and feels like, given our current layout, our current outlook to the market, and what the expectation is for one individual in that role. And then the third thing is tool set. Do you have the tools in place? Do you understand how our procedures are set up, and what the tactics and the techniques are for how to go out and find potential prospects, how to nurture those into qualified leads, and how to develop those and develop a solution to bring to bear and present that to a customer so they're interested in buying it. So that's kind of at a high level. Down towards the more tactical, and especially on the product side, product training is important. We have, I think at last count, over 200 unique products. Frankly, it's probably too many. We're working on that as well. But it's very complex what we do, because every system cell, what we call, so when we bring to bear a bulk powder or bulk material handling system, it's a collection of individual machines that work together in concert using automation, or maybe a combination of automation and manual intervention. And every single system is just a little bit different than the other ones, even from one line to the next within the same plant.
Right.
With improvements. The layout is slightly different, so there are impacts and whatnot. And so when we talk about product training, really the key focus for us right now is, what are the features of this individual machine? What are the advantages that it brings? And fundamentally, if we use those things in concert with the other equipment that we have, what outcomes can we achieve for the customer based on what they need? And those
So you have to try to somehow pour all that into a sales rep's head and then say, but don't talk about this, talk about the business.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a very, I would call it a strict protocol around when is it appropriate for you to start talking about Azo, and it's very far into the future of a potential of the sales cycle overall.
So that is not the way somebody would naturally start selling on their own.
No, for sure.
And I would argue that if you're not getting positive onboarding and positive sales training, you're going to develop your own, and smart people and hardworking people are going to try something and they may have some success. And so that gets locked in. So then it's really hard to change. And if it's a 20% acceptable solution, you got to change it. If it's a 70% acceptable solution, that may not be the priority. You may live with that in the short term. But how do you try to, what's the right way to say it? Prevent people from forming bad habits by dumping all of this good habit, best practice information on them right out of the gate when it's overwhelming?
Yeah. So I think it takes time. I look for in a candidate someone who has the capacity to take on a lot in a short amount of time. So we're pretty selective, as you know, about what we're looking for in a sales candidate. The other expectation too is in the early go, because of the level of complexity that we're doing when we term it system sales, it's not transactional. It's relational. It takes a lot of time and energy to develop those relationships and to establish that credibility. And so I'm less focused on, are you meeting a hard sales objective versus are you developing the skill set? Do you have the mindset? When we have one-on-one interactions and you tell me about how a call went, if I'm not hearing the right types of responses to the questions, or you are not sharing that you're asking the right kinds of questions, then we focus on that thing. And and we're building good habits. And the role playing and the coaching piece comes into that, where if you asked a question a certain way and you got a certain answer, let's think about what's another way that you might ask that question to get a better answer, to get a better outcome. And so I spend a lot of time in that space.
You also have to be a motivator. I mean, sales is hard. There's long hours. There's a lot of unpleasant tasks. The highs are high. The lows are low, as the saying goes. I believe that accountability and grit are really important aspects of mindset. That's why I often recommend companies look for NCAA athletes or military veterans as a background when they're recruiting for sales. What lessons do you think you took from your Air Force experience that have helped you in sales?
It's funny, the organization that I came from, the nuke community, the standards for success are exceedingly high. And in fact, after I got out, there were some changes that were made to that mindset. And so, failure really wasn't an option. And by failure, I mean, on a written test, if you got a 90% on that test, you have failed that test.
Wow.
And so there's probably a lot more to say about that culture, but what it taught me was the importance of discipline, the importance of practicing, and going through not going through the motions, but establishing credibility through repeated practice. Yeah. Practice.
Right.
We conducted monthly testing in 3 or 4 different areas. We would have a training facility that was a mock-up of the capsule where we were underground. And we had monthly training. We had constant evaluations, performance reports, performance reporting checks, and things like that. And so, that really kind of firmly established in my mind that if you practice hard and you practice the way you're supposed to do it in the real world, then that is the best preparation for being able to go out and actually do it.
Yeah, and the Army would say you fight the way you train.
Yep.
So that's kind of culture and grit and discipline. We'll talk more about the leadership and management lessons maybe in a minute. But first, I want to take a detour to Memphis barbecue. I know you're not just a discerning consumer. You're also a part of a team that competes annually in, I think, what they call the Super Bowl of Swine in Memphis, the World Championship Barbecue Cooking Contest. So what is your role on that team?
Yeah, so I joined this team a couple of years ago, and when I joined, the guy that brought me in said, "Hey, listen, we've got a well-established cooking team. these guys have been doing this for, in some cases over 30 years.
Wow.
But this team has been together for at least 20 years. So don't expect to, have a prominent role in that. And I was like, hey, listen, I'm here to party. I'm here to enjoy myself and to help wherever I can. Flash forward to last year, there were one guy was like, hey, I need to take a step back and we need some help on the barbecue cooking team. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll join in. And so I got indoctrinated, we'll say, in the barbecue aspect from a cooking standpoint on the team. But I've got a grill at home. I do a tremendous amount of cooking at home and smoking meat and things like that. It's just, it's a real joy. It's funny. I've got a couple different hobbies, barbecue being one of them. The return on the efforts that you make is almost instant. You get, it only, at most, it takes a day to smoke a shoulder.
Right.
So in my professional life, our sales cycle sometimes is 2 years. The amount of time and energy you put into this thing to receive the payoff is excruciatingly long.
Right.
I look for things in my personal life to return a little bit better. And there are few greater joys that I have than putting time and energy into making a dish that someone then eats, and you see the look on their face like, wow, this is fantastic.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, it's really gratifying.
Your former boss, who's also on the team, I think, spent time over the years very graciously trying to help me, a Yankee, understand the nuance of how to prep a pork butt. I mean, he had me injecting stuff, and I've tried different things. But it's fascinating. For those of us that do not understand the nuance, what characterizes Memphis barbecue, and how does that compare to other styles?
Yeah, so Memphis barbecue is traditionally pork barbecue, so either ribs or shoulder, or if you've got a grill large enough, a whole hog. So I do a lot of pork shoulder at home, and I do ribs. It's a dry rub, so we're not putting any wet on at all. And low and slow is what we call it. So we typically will smoke a shoulder at like 215, 225. And I've had shoulders take 22 hours before.
Really?
So you can't rush it. If you rush it, it's gonna turn out terrible. So
wow.
That's my trick.
And what beer pairs best with pulled pork?
I don't know that you can really go wrong. So yeah, we have a sponsor. Here's a plug. We have a sponsor at our booth. We get a bunch of Shiner Bock free every year. So I have my fair share of Shiner while I'm down at the river for the festival. So
got it. Okay, shifting back to your current role, you've made one of the toughest transitions, I think, in sales. One that's fraught for many companies. You've gone from being sales engineer to sales manager. Talk about what that experience has been like.
It's a lot of things. It's kind of a mixed bag. It's been deeply rewarding. It's been very humbling. I thought I was well suited for this role, and time will tell if that remains to be true. From day one at Azo, I've looked at the organization as a place where I wanted to grow long term. And small businesses, we are a small business by many measures. And small businesses typically have lots of challenges, and certainly not enough people around who can dedicate their time to solving just this one problem. And so really from the beginning, I took on an ownership mentality of see a problem, fix a problem.
Right.
And so I have spent several years kind of taking on that mentality and really trying to apply that in areas where I can affect some change. And so when it came time to make a management transition, so we've undergone several transitions here in the last year or so. I think I was definitely the most qualified to do it, and also, frankly, the only one who was probably willing to take on that role. It's kind of like I mentioned before, my wife and I dated for 7 years before we got married. And right before we got married, during that engagement period, I I kind of underestimated the challenges that would come about in having a marriage. And I thought kind of foolishly,
You're the only one that's ever done that.
I've been doing this thing for a long time now, right? Like those guys who get married after 6 months, they don't know what's coming, whatever. And I was immediately humbled by the natural challenges that would come about when you have made a transition like that. And that's been true for this role as well. My tendency is to tell and not ask and find ways to get buy-in. So that's been a huge lesson. We made a major transition in how we go about trying to sell in the market. And the first iteration of that was me telling our team of very experienced salespeople, certainly in some cases a lot more experienced than I have, telling them what they need to do. As you might imagine, that didn't go so well.
Is that propensity to tell, is that Mike, or is that the engineer speaking, or is that something you got from the Air Force? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think that's inherently Mike. I'm a very direct person. I like to be in control of things. That's where I feel safest. And I'm a smart guy. I have a pretty decent outlook on things. I have certainly an ability to see a problem and recognize intuitively what some of those challenges are.
Right.
That's not foolproof for sure. But when you take that mentality into organizational change, and there are dozens of factors at play, and some of those factors are competing, it's not reasonable. It's not possible for an individual to have figured everything out before you ever even start.
Right.
And so that's been probably the biggest lesson I've taken away from this transition time. I'm happy to say now I think we're in a much better place. I force myself to get buy-in from the get-go, and not just buy-in, but feedback, right? We're going to make a change. Hey, listen, I've got this idea. Right now, it's nothing more than an idea. I'm curious what your thoughts are, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to have to do this thing. And so, let's make it our idea, and then we'll figure it out. And I will be there alongside to help, to help do whatever it is that we have to do.
So many companies, when it comes time to either create a sales management role or to replace somebody in that role, they're inclined normally to just pick the top performing rep. But that's problematic. From your perspective now, having made this transition, why do you think that fails so frequently?
Management it's a mindset and a skill set completely independent of the doing role. My experience is that most companies, they pick the guy who did the job the best to go and be a manager. And if, and maybe that'll work out. Maybe there's some natural talent there for management. Maybe they have a really strong interest in doing it. Certainly, if there's a pay bump associated with that, they're enticed to take on that role. But not having proper support for how to make that transition, how to expand your mind, is certainly problematic. If I hadn't gone and gotten my MBA, I think I would be pretty unqualified to do this role when I took that role on. So that was a huge help for me. But then also, my leadership team and our colleagues in Germany recognizing that there's potential, but potential without the proper massaging doesn't become the thing that we need it to be. It's the same as when we look to hire a new sales engineer. I'm not looking for someone who has all the skills and can do the thing. What I want to see is, do they have the right attributes? Do they have the mindset? And are they willing to develop? Do they have the determination, the motivation, the desire?
Sure.
And when things get tough, can they dig down and find ways to do it? I think that's also true for management as well.
Yeah, and you need onboarding as a sales manager, just like you need onboarding as a sales rep.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really hard to go from peer to boss. Now, those of us in the military have often learned how to navigate that. It's just a natural part of evolution of your career in the military or your time in the military. Talk about that part of your experience in sales.
Yeah. the initial transition. So before I was in the director of sales and marketing role, I was promoted to a mid-level management role within our organization. And that transition was pretty challenging because I went from working with a couple of peers to now being directly responsible for those peers. And there were questions of credibility, specifically with one individual. He is a longstanding employee, by many measures, very successful, had a solid book of business. And so we had to go through a period of kind of testing.
Right.
And that wasn't fun. Sometimes it was fun. I tried to make it fun, but most importantly, it was an opportunity for me to learn, and I needed to have a safe space where I could go and talk to either a trusted colleague or in that case, my boss at the time, and say, hey, listen, these are the things I'm challenged with and struggling with. Can you provide some insight or maybe give me some food for thought that I can kind of chew on, and I'll come up with what's a better way to do that thing next time.
And how often were there insights, and how often was it you need to just pull up your big boy pants and go do it?
Yeah, probably a pretty healthy balance between the two. Sometimes, it's funny, as time goes on, the idea of therapy is, I think, come a long way. In traditional business sense, the idea of having a quote unquote therapy session would probably be pretty taboo. But that's how I view.
We call it business coach. We don't call it therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So coaching session really is, sometimes it's nothing more than I haven't taken the time to verbalize and get out of my own head to be able to understand what happened. And so having someone to just talk to, and whether they're providing insight or whether they're just there to help me work through what these ideas are, and come up with some ideas on my own. That's been super valuable for me. So,
all right, you've got a lot of depth in leadership and management from your Air Force training. We call the role, and I understand you're in a VP of sales and marketing, or director of sales and marketing role, but in many ways, you're a sales manager. You've got reps that are directly reporting to you. So embedded in that term is the word manager. But is sales manager, is it a management or a leadership role?
It's definitely both.
Okay.
I mean, my role, or my time in the Air Force, the military really focuses on leadership. I think management is absolutely necessary. They're just, the day-to-day things. A typical sales engineer has a lot on their plate, and it can be easy to let one thing go here or there, and that's just the nature of the beast. The good ones are really good at balancing those things, and the average ones need a little bit of coaching and help along that way.
And accountability.
And that's the other piece of that is accountability. I think accountability comes in different forms. Accountability from a management perspective is, hey, you're slacking a little bit in this thing. Let's talk about this. Accountability from a leadership standpoint is, are you developing yourself? Are you challenging yourself? We have established that you have goals that you want to achieve this month, this quarter, this year. Are you tracking on those things?
I would also argue that accountability from a leadership perspective is demonstrating the willingness and the ability to do any of the unpleasant tasks that you're expecting somebody else to do.
Yeah, I think that's true too. Yeah.
So you alluded earlier to the fact that there have been a number of changes in the way you guys go to market. And that was kind of, I think, part of your transition as you went from being a sales engineer to taking on these progressively advanced levels of responsibility. But the process originally was similar to what's followed by most industrial companies, kind of something along the lines of, you get an inquiry, you collect technical details, you do a quote, you negotiate the commercials, and then you follow up and hope. And, for many companies, that's just the natural way of thinking about it. They don't see any issues with that. Now you've got perspective. You're doing something different. You've been through that fairly grueling process of designing it and implementing it and beginning to hold people accountable to it. What have you learned are the problems with this process that seemed perfectly reasonable to you a couple of years ago?
I guess a couple things. So one idea real quick, you mentioned you used the word hope. hope is no longer in our language. Hope is a good thing in your personal life. When you say your prayers, this all makes sense. But I have instructed our team that we don't hope for things anymore.
Yeah, I mean, let's replace hope with optimism. Optimism is kind of a mindset. Hope is like you said,
well,
not helpful.
The challenge with hoping that something will happen is that you give up all your agency. And fundamentally, that's the thing that it's a double-edged sword. And we have, from a leadership standpoint, one of the topics that we've been working on a lot in this last year is I don't want to hear language that says I'm not in control of some outcome.
I love that.
And to be clear, we cannot control everything, right? But we need to narrowly define what is in our scope of control and what is outside, and figure out what those limits are. And if there's a gap between what we can do and what we can't control, if there are things that we can do to affect and get closer to that, then that's all the better.
And if you can't, then do you disqualify that opportunity?
I think it depends. It's circumstantial and nuanced.
Sure.
But it's making an informed decision, right? If we are choosing to go after something that has a lesser degree of certainty than maybe we would like, we know full stop that we're making that decision, and we're not just following blindly, hoping and praying that something happens, that someone's going to make a decision that we have no ability to control.
And so someone somewhere isn't buying extra stainless steel and hiring more welders in order to produce the system that you're hoping you're going to sell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at any rate.
So one of the problems with that traditional process is it relies on hope. Any other problems with it?
Yeah, I mean, this idea of you don't have any accountability to the outcomes, right? The market is down. Customers aren't buying because of X. All of the excuses takes away any responsibility for I didn't meet an outcome or an objective, or I met 80% of my target. This is what I did. This is what I could have done better. And I wish I could control this thing, but I can't. So I'm just going to leave that alone. And what can I do differently the next time?
And so how does your new process specifically address those things?
Yeah. So critically qualifying new opportunities forces our team and the individual sales engineers to ask the tough hitting questions, right? Are we getting to the root cause of why a company is struggling with some issue? And if you can't answer those questions, then you haven't taken it far enough. And so you don't get to progress to the next stage in the process, right?
Is your default to qualify in or constantly try to qualify out?
So I think it kind of depends. If it's someone that we've never done business with before, the default is to try and disqualify that as quickly as possible.
Okay.
We are trying to get to that same mindset for well-established customers. That can be a challenge because of pre-existing relationships.
Because if I'm a rep and 70% of my business every year comes from the same two accounts and I'm making plenty of money and I'm hitting my number, then
and the guy that works at that company is my friend, right? And I don't want to tell him no because that's going to affect our relationship, right? But those are real dynamics that we struggle with. And I recognize that it can be exceptionally challenging to figure out how to say no. But the counterpoint to that is let's assume, for argument's sake, that this one project is never going to get bought. How much time do you want to waste, and how much time of your customers do you want to waste trying to figure it out, only to come to that realization? Wouldn't it be better to understand early on in the process that this project has no life
for both of you?
Yeah, for everyone involved, right? You're providing assurance that our time collectively is going to be well spent,
right?
And so that's where we spent a lot of time thinking about those relationships in that way. There's obviously some challenges. We've got customers who things were great at one point, and then new folks have come into play. They have competing opinions about us as an organization? How do you deal with those things? So it's really, really complex, but fundamentally creating a structure around anytime I talk to a customer, this is what I don't know about what we're talking about. This is what I'm trying to find out. And this is what I still don't know. If we can put conversations and the elements of a conversation into those buckets, then we have a good understanding of what have we done and what is still to be.
You make a good point about the perishable relationships or the perishable account level relationship as people change. Where there's a lot of retirements going on. There's also, people spend less time with companies. What's your expectation for your sales engineers in this kind of account management or farming sort of an aspect of their job? How many relationships do you expect them to have to guard against that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I have a great answer for it. I think it largely depends. I can say that on a per individual basis that no one in our organization has enough of those relationships yet. So I don't know that we've really reached a practical limit. And I think it depends because the nature of capital equipment system sales, the sales cycles are really long, but we may go a couple years between major purchases. So the intensity of a relationship is going to ebb and flow.
Right.
And so understanding for any one customer relationship, where are you in that cycle? And are you applying an appropriate amount of touch and interaction to keep the interest and the engagement up enough to kind of stem, in that dip? We're not talking to you 2, 3, 5 times a week. It might be once a month or something like that.
That's hard because you got to give value. I mean, nobody has time to, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing kind of calls or emails. So you have to figure out how to consistently deliver value to justify the fact that you're reaching out to somebody.
Absolutely. And that's where staying in touch with the industry. So keeping up on industry trends. And this is one area where we have a lot of work to do. For me, as a sales director, defining what are the things that we're looking for from a market intelligence standpoint? What trends are we looking at? What markets are we focused on? And what are the reasons why, we don't pick a target market just because we've been successful there.
Right.
We pick a target market because there's opportunity, and specifically, what are the challenges that customers are facing? What are they trying to accomplish? What are the obstacles that they may be getting in the way? And finding credible information that we can use from a sales enablement standpoint. Hey, listen, here's some food for thought. We haven't touched base in a while. If you want to talk about this thing, that'd be great. I don't know if this is affecting you, but I suspect that it might, it might be, and having those types of touch points, a meaningful touch point, right? Every interaction, there has to be some value, even if it's a small amount of value, right? The amount of time it takes to interact on that single touch point may be low. And so the amount of value associated might also be commensurate. But there has to be something there.
And people will remember if an article you sent or an idea you shared or a news item that you passed along suddenly becomes helpful to them when they're sitting in a staff meeting and they can pull it out and contribute to the conversation, they'll remember that you brought them that value.
Yeah, and it's interesting, over the last couple of years, the sales engineers that I've been responsible for, and now it's our whole team, they will periodically send me a trade association article about some topic. And early on, I would read it, we would talk about it, and say, this is interesting. And then that was it. And now it's, okay, what's your plan to use this information? Who are you going to share this with?
Right.
And why, when you think of this thing, which of your customers comes to mind and what does that conversation look like? And let's make sure that you're doing that, taking that next step. So that's been a big change for me is every interaction that we have, every piece of information that we see, there has to be some utility to it. Right. There has to be some value in being able to share.
75% of B2B buyers wish that they could have sales rep-free experiences because reps just suck the energy out of most transactions. They're not adding value. And what a great opportunity to just differentiate your business. If you can add value, that's huge.
Yeah.
So you talked about market
low pressure interactions, right? Yeah.
You talked about market research. One of many tasks that you have. You got a lot of balls in the air, things on your plate, whatever simile you want to use. How do you spend most of your time as sales manager? What is the activity as sales manager that you spend the majority of your time on?
Overall, it's interacting one-on-one with my team. So having one-on-one interactions, helping them through managing the tasks that they get, the challenges, the objections that they may get from one project to a next with one individual versus another. So that's the majority of my time and where I'm spending. The rest of the time is trying to be outwardly focused on the market and trying to anticipate what changes might be coming down. And then one step from that is my role as part of our what we call a steering committee, our executive board for our organization, and being a positive contributing member to the overall business challenges that we have, whether it's providing some insight or some recommendations on ideas, or stepping in and lending a hand to accomplish some task, whatever it might be.
Most people in your role, when they're spending time one-on-one, what they really mean is they're talking about pricing and they're talking about trying to get quotes done, neither of which really lead to a sales outcome. They may be important steps along the way.
Yeah.
How do you have any sense of how you allocate time across those one-on-ones and what the areas of emphasis are?
Yeah, so it depends on the individual and their tenure. So for our less tenured folks, I spend a lot of time training. And
product or sales?
Sales, yeah, sales, and talking about the inquiries that they're dealing with, challenging them on trying to help them develop the tool set for the way that they're going to engage with their customer. So, reviewing, don't tell me what you talked about. Tell me, how did this one thing go? Let's talk about this one aspect and maybe how you could do that differently. And then also talking about and challenging, trying to understand the customer relationship dynamics for new customers and also well-established customers. If we have an inquiry, we're going through some understanding. Let's just assume, for argument's sake, that we fundamentally understand what the challenge is, and now we're tasked with providing a solution. I'm less involved these days in reviewing a process flow diagram. Have you designed this system well? And I'm more focused on, does this system achieve the outcome that we're looking for? Have you communicated this to the customer? How are you going to communicate that to the customer? Are you just going to email them a quote and pray, or let's take a different tack and take them through our process, right? And really trying to institutionalize, I think is probably the best word, those methodologies on how we're going to present our solutions in order to affect a positive outcome.
You've mentioned sales hiring a couple of times. It's relatively easy to hire salespeople. It's really hard to hire great salespeople. I coach folks in your role that they ought to be looking, the baseline expectation ought to be that you want to hire second standard deviation talent. Now, of course, that means you have to have an objective and predictably accurate way to measure that. So you've got a good sense, but then you got to be really good at interviewing, and then the onboarding has to be great. Of course, it's even harder to hire great salespeople who have the technical aptitude that you've mentioned. You got to find that combination so they can have the technical conversation and the sales and business conversation. And I'd say, that's why, according to some research, up to 80% of sales reps in the kind of space you're in are chronically missing quota. What have you learned in your time as sales manager or observing some hiring before you were a sales manager? What are the key guiding principles that you have now in hiring salespeople?
Yeah. The traditional cultural mindset within AZO is that you have to be a highly technical person. So traditionally an engineer. I think at present, every salesperson on our team is an engineer. So that's technically true today. But I think we have, over the last couple of years, started to realize that there's a difference between deep technical understanding of what we do and having a technical aptitude.
Right.
So being able to understand at a high level from a functionality standpoint, and more importantly, from this system is going to perform this task, and this means that the business will achieve some objective. Being able to communicate that at a high level. And if a customer wants to get in the weeds and wants to talk about some detail, we can create space for that, and we will bring in someone to address those things if that is critical to winning the business. Otherwise, we say, listen, we know we will do the detailed design work that happens in the project execution phase. And our project engineers are chomping at the bit to have those conversations with you.
Right.
And so trying to get our customers more in line with that. And then also realizing that the folks that want to talk about those really technical things fundamentally aren't the folks that are making decisions about projects.
Right.
And that if we bring, one level removed from that, or even a couple levels removed from that to the conversation when we're trying to sell, those conversations tend to be less technical in nature.
Yeah, they may well be making the vendor selection decision, but they're not making the decision about whether capital is going to be approved. So in other words, the project can't go ahead just because they want to select you as a vendor.
Yeah. So we tend to focus on, we're going to win the business if we can scratch this one engineer's itch, because he's really interested in this thing, and this thing. When it's all said and done, that's a box that gets checked, right? The technical solution has to make sense within the overall business plan, sure. But at the board level or at an advisory decision-making level, they're not going through line by line on the quote, right? Does this quote meet the specification, or does this meet what we think it's going to accomplish? Mr. Engineer, yes, it does. Okay.
How might it go wrong? What risks do we have in moving ahead with this project? Could the market change, or do we have any embedded assumptions that are incorrect? But nobody is asking at that level, do we have the right clearance for the panel doors to open so that we can get in there and work on it?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's play a quick word association game. Okay. Price, competitors, market. What do you think of when I say those things?
Varied or flexible.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must not have done it very well. I was hoping that what you're going to think of was common excuses that you hear from salespeople.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, if you had thrown in lead time, then you would have gotten it for sure.
How do you, when you're sitting down with a rep and they say, "Well, Mike, how do you expect me to sell it? Our price is too high." What's your answer?
What is too high, right? What you think is too high is different from anyone else, and a lot of companies, traditionally take a cost plus approach, and we have spent a lot of time and energy trying to get into a dynamic pricing structure. If we fundamentally understand what the value of the problem is, and we can realize some ROI, and it's not exact, this is an argument that oftentimes happens with engineers. It's like everything has to be down to the penny, and it's like nuts. People don't buy capital equipment down to the penny. They want at least 2 zeros at the end of that whole figure, right? Like that's good enough. And if we're leaving pennies on the table, okay, I can live with that, right? But this idea that the cost of a thing and the price of a thing are inextricably linked is a fundamental fallacy, because one company will pay one price and another company will pay another price. And it's our job to figure out, that's a puzzle, right?
And it will be, and the price that they pay will represent a fabulous value for them, because it's going to impact their business in a way that's worth 5x whatever they're paying.
Yep. Yeah. So if a rep comes back and says our costs are too high and we're not realizing the margins on a job because this customer is cheap, and even though we've gone through these motions and I've demonstrated value, their budget is X and they're not going to move off on that. Okay, we can have a realistic conversation. Do we want to take this business, or do we want to move on to greener pastures? That's because a real conversation I'm interested in having.
Part of your model is the life cycle services, the spare parts, the service, the future machine orders. And if you're having that struggle up front with the first order, the likelihood the rest of that comes along behind is lower, I would assume.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently went through a training as well. And this idea of our perspective on what's important over time versus our customers' perspective on what's important over time.
Right.
We get focused on this piece that's a very small time frame, and it's very important. If we don't do it well, then everything else that comes after gets screwed up. Right. But our customers are thinking about our equipment on a 10 to 25 year cycle, right? Even the longest sales cycle, 2 or 3 years, is a small fraction of that overall time. And so if we're not thinking about that total time frame, then we're missing a critical piece of understanding of where the customer is coming from.
Right.
So
let's talk sales compensation. Salespeople, in my experience, are much more intrinsically motivated now than they were 20 years ago. So, boomers might have really responded to financial incentives, and that might have caused them to work more, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle for a younger generation of salespeople who may value more highly the feeling of accomplishment or contributing to the company. What's your experience in terms of structuring compensation so that it incents behavior regardless of what somebody's primary motivation is?
Yeah. It's interesting too, because if we look at where we're currently hiring from, the next generation of talent, those folks, their financial outlook and financial picture is kind of bleak. Their ability to borrow to generate wealth within their own, within the same amount of time that I had at that age, it's quite different. And so while there is, you're absolutely right, there is a trend towards intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. There are still external factors that come into play for someone's ability to earn, to create the lifestyle that they want.
But as a sales manager, you must have to spend a lot of time pushing those dots close together for people.
Yeah. So having the right kinds of conversations, modeling from a leadership standpoint, if you work really hard and achieve these outcomes, these are the effects that it can have on your life.
Do you have to sit down and help them write out personal goals in most cases?
Yeah. So that's a big piece of that, right? Is to say, what are your personal goals? Have you thought about what you want to be, where you want to be in 5 years? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to, these types of things? And if you want those things, here's a plan, here's a path, how we can get there. And how does that factor into your ability to be successful at your job?
Right.
The other piece of that too, I do think there is some intrinsic motivation that we can derive from what we do within our organization. I oftentimes, when people ask me on the street, I've had this happen a couple times in an Uber, where someone will just kind of generically ask, what is it that you do? And I intentionally kind of give them a mundane answer. And then I say, but it's actually it's a lot more interesting than that. I get to be a part of the economic engine that makes this world go.
Absolutely. If you walk through a grocery store, you get to see the stuff that you've actually helped companies put into packages and put on the shelf in stores for people to eat.
Yeah. And that's a perfect example. And I'll use one example. I'll say, have you ever thought about when you go to buy a box of pancake mix and it's $2.59, like how do you think a company can make it so that thing is so inexpensive? Because if you thought about everything that goes into that, you couldn't possibly make all that stuff and arrive at that outcome for that cheap a price. It takes a tremendous amount of energy, a lot of people, the number of hands that touch, all of these things factor in, and people start to think, oh wow, that you're completely right. I've never even stopped to consider just how much energy goes into making the things that make our lives convenient, but more importantly fulfilling, and allow us to live the lives that we want to live. And so I also communicate that to our team as well.
I can see how that would definitely scratch that intrinsic motivational itch. You say the number of hands that touch it. I think I'm maybe more libertarian than you. I might say the number of invisible hands that touch it, to channel Adam
fair.
there.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
All right. So you're a member of a barbecue team. You manage a sales team. So a lot of team stuff, but you also have some individual pursuits, marathoning, and I know you're kind of doing this protracted hike of the Appalachian Mountain Trail.
That's
How do
true.
you is the individual stuff something to let you clear your mind, or how does that fit with all the time you spend in team situations?
Yeah, running especially affords me an opportunity to what's a good term for it? It's not disassociate, but it allows me to go to a place where I don't have to be focused on the immediate, the day to day. I can start to I do a lot of creative thought work. I do a lot of introspective thought work while I run, and really the long distance running is what allows me to get there because it takes a bit of time. The motion of a 20-minute run, I don't get there. I have to be out there for an hour or more, and so training for a marathon, for instance, when you do that 20-mile run, it's like 4.5 hours of actual running because you're running at a much slower pace. It's remarkable the things that the places that your mind will take you when you have that space and have that opportunity. So yeah, it's deeply rewarding.
And when are you going to finish the full AMT?
Ooh. So we're doing about 100 or so miles at a go. Sometimes we do twice a year, but most often it's just once a year. So I will be almost 60 when we're done. I suspect towards the end when things are, I'm in a different place in life, I'll have more free time and we might knock out, a month here or a few weeks there. So hopefully it'll be less than that. I hope my body holds up until then. There are days when I feel 60, even now. I'm sure that's an offensive idea to you, but but yeah. So yeah.
Shifting gears, what's something that you've worked really hard at doing well, but you just can't get as good at as you're accustomed to? Most of the things you touch, you kind of figure out pretty naturally and do well. What's something you really struggled with?
That's a good question. I mean, it's a little bit squishy, but finding balance in the operational day to day and switching gears to thinking about strategy or long term things within the business. That transition can be really painful, and I would think that my mind is more elastic than that. And maybe I don't know if it's a skill set. I don't know. I haven't really figured out what that thing is. But finding ways to be able to transition, because both things can come up quickly. And I try to do a good job of planning those types of activities from day to day. But oftentimes I can get thrown, especially if I'm working on something strategic, getting thrown into the operational and then having to come back. That's a bit of a challenge.
As a dad, knowing what you know, having been through your sales journey, learning about sales, observing sales, and kind of becoming a student of it and now teaching others, would you recommend at this point that your kids go into sales?
My kids are young. They're 5 and 7. So I don't really know who they are yet. And if they had a desire or an interest to go into sales, I would absolutely support it. There's the things that I love the most about sales is every day is different. Every interaction is different. The idea that I would come to work and basically do the same thing every day sounds like torture, frankly. And there are people that are wired that way, and God love them because we need them.
Right.
But the worst thing would be if one of my or both of my kids were wired a certain way and they weren't in a role where they found fulfillment and whatnot.
So you come more from a gentle parenting generation than I do. My answer would be, I think every kid ought to spend time in sales. I think every kid ought to spend time learning finance. Now, if it's 6 months or a year, fine. But I think they become such more valuable contributing employees, whether they want to be entrepreneurs on their own or work for a big company or contribute to a small company. Having that perspective makes them so much better.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And, you're aware we have an engineering development program This is how we are going to grow and train the next generation of talent in our organization. And there are several stops along the way. One of those used to be optionally a role in sales. It is now compulsory for precisely that reason. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday about this, and we kind of stopped and thought about it. And I asked him, I said, "What, in your opinion, why are you in this rotation?" And he thought, he's like, "Well, trying to see if I'm a good fit for sales." And I said, "That's one thing. We're trying to assess your capacity or your aptitude for it. But more important to that is that you gain a sense of appreciation and understanding for how hard this thing is." Right. And that's true for the other stops along the way as well, right?
Sure.
That we can create empathy within our organization, that whether you're in one department or the next, they're all hard. They're hard for different reasons, but that you have been there, you have done the thing, and that when we make mistakes, it's not intentional, right? It's a challenge. And that you develop some empathy for your colleagues in those roles, and maybe even offer some help and some opportunity to come alongside and say, "I understand, I've been there, and but we'll get through."
From your seat, what makes you most nervous about U.S. manufacturing right now?
The uncertainty of everything, and the uncertainty of where the market's going to go. But probably most importantly, the deficiency or the deficit of skilled labor and talent performing those tasks: welders, electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters. I mean, we don't deal with every trade in our organization, but there are millions and millions of open positions, and there's no one there to backfill those roles. So I don't know how we grow as a country, as an economy, if we're not going to fill those roles.
Are you most productive doing creative stuff morning or night?
That's a good question, because I've had success in both. I think
Really?
it kind of depends. It kind of depends on the day. Lately, it's been at night. We've really been digging into artificial intelligence and generative AI, and I've been sitting on the couch tinkering with ChatGPT to see what the limitations are, what the opportunities are. And I think that's deeply creative work fundamentally right now. So
books, podcasts, YouTube channels. If somebody wanted to begin to take the similar journey as you, where do you find it's really helpful for you to go for information that helps you stay sharp and continue to improve?
From a leadership and management standpoint, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. I find his approach to leadership to be really thoughtful and in line with how I kind of see things. From a sales standpoint, Gap Selling by Keenan was a pretty foundational book for me. And his podcast is really interesting. The nature of that podcast, you can pick up wherever you want. And you can find something that's useful. You don't have to start at the beginning and work your way all the way through it.
Right.
So,
if folks would like to contact you for, insights from your experience or just kind of track what you're doing on social media, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah. You can go to our website, azo-inc.com. My contact information is on that site, or I can be reached via email, or LinkedIn as well. So.
Okay. And if somebody wants to attend the World Championship, the swine, whatever you guys call it down there, any tips for somebody on doing that? Do you have a lot of people come from out of town?
Yeah. So, there are teams that come from out of town, international. It's an international competition.
Wow.
It's a bit misleading. It is. It's not like a barbecue festival in the traditional sense where folks are selling their stuff. It is. It's a gigantic collection of private parties. So to have a really good time, you kind of have to know someone. But we are always open. You can kind of tell when someone hasn't been there before and it's their first time. They're kind of walking around like a deer in the headlights, and so we graciously, "Hey, you look hot. Why don't you sit down?
Have a Shiner Bock."
yeah, you need a beer, you want some food, whatever. So yeah, our team is called Voodoo Q. So I don't know what our booth number is this year, but we're the ones with all the skulls outside. So if you find yourself at the competition, stop by and say hello.
All right, we've talked about a lot of stuff across sales and leadership and management. Wrap us up. For business leaders that want, let's say, more predictability in their industrial sales, that are navigating a sales management decision or frustrated with underperforming reps, give us your consolidated 3 minutes of advice.
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say have a process. But before you have a process, go out and do some research. Find some resources on successful models and find what works and what fits for you. And then create that structure and stick to it. And it's about progress, not perfection. If you can increase sales by even a small percentage, then you're doing better than most. So, yeah, I don't know if that was too short or too concise, but.
Well, it's your advice, and I mean that's what we're here to listen to. Somebody that's actually going through this journey, rather than somebody that just theorizes about it.
Yeah. I would say the other piece to that is develop a network of folks that you can bounce ideas off of. Maybe don't choose your competition, but we're a relatively small industry, so there's only so many folks around. But find folks that you can share common ideas with, challenges and struggles, and be able to create a space for that, to where you can really help to develop and hone your craft.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, Mike. Thank you for taking time. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for opening up and visiting with me and the Industrial Growth Institute podcast audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed it as well. So thanks for the opportunity, Ed, and looking forward to talking to you the next time.
Sounds good. So everyone listening, thank you as well for investing time visiting with Mike and me. Please remember to like and share and drop a comment, and by all means, please subscribe as well.